The air in the neonatal intensive care unit at St. Jude's Metropolitan tasted of antiseptic and ozone, a sterile cocktail that Maya Ramirez had long ago come to associate with hope. It was 3:14 a.m., the hour of ghosts, when the city outside held its breath and the hospital's true pulse was most audible. Here, in the sanctuary of the third floor, that pulse was a delicate orchestra of soft beeps, the gentle hiss and whoosh of ventilators, and the almost imperceptible sighs of the 7 tiny souls cocooned in their glowing incubators. Maya moved between them with a practiced, reverent grace. Her rounds were a familiar liturgy. A soft touch to a foot no bigger than her thumb, a quiet adjustment of a feeding tube, a whispered word of encouragement to a baby whose chart listed him only as infant boy doe, but whom she called Leo in the quiet of her own mind, because he had the spirit of a tiny lion. These weren't just patients, they were promises. Each one, a universe of potential fighting against impossible odds. Her job, as she saw it, was to stand guard at the edge of that universe and keep the darkness at bay. The first sound was alien, a flat percussive pop that cut through the rhythmic symphony of the NICU. Liam, a junior nurse barely out of his 20s, looked up from his charting station, his face illuminated by the glow of the monitor. "One of the old monitors probably blew a capacitor," he said, his voice casual, not lifting his head. But Maya froze, her hand hovering over an incubator. She was a city kid, raised in a neighborhood where you learned to catalog the sounds of the night for survival. That wasn't a capacitor. It was a sound that belonged to concrete and asphalt, to panicked shouts and sirens. It had no place here, in this temple of fragile life. Then came a second pop, closer this time, followed by a muffled scream that was abruptly cut short. The sound was swallowed by the thick hospital walls, but its chilling echo remained. The overhead speaker crackled, a burst of static, and then a panicked voice, strained and cracking. "Code Silver, 3rd floor. Active shooter on the 3rd floor." The words hung in the sterile air for a fraction of a second before reality collapsed. 3rd floor. They were on the 3rd floor. Liam's face went white, his pen clattering to the linoleum floor. The serene pulse of the NICU was instantly replaced by the frantic, screeching rhythm of a full-blown alarm, a sound designed to signal crisis, not create it. Protocol. The word flashed in Maya's mind, a relic from a training seminar that suddenly felt a lifetime away. Shelter in place, barricade the door, hide, wait for law enforcement. It was a logical plan for an office building, for a storeroom, for anywhere but here. The main wall of the NICU was a single, panoramic pane of glass, designed to let anxious parents see in and to give the staff an unobstructed view of their charges. It was a fishbowl, a shooting gallery. Shelter in place? They might as well paint a target on the door. The sound of gunfire echoed down the hallway, a brutal, staccato beat that vibrated through the soles of her shoes. They were close, coming closer. "Maya, what do we do?" Liam whispered, his voice trembling, his eyes wide with a terror that mirrored her own. There was no time for committee decisions, no time to call a physician or wait for guidance. There was only instinct, raw and screaming, an ancient maternal command that superseded all procedural logic. "The closet," she said, her voice a command that surprised even herself with its firmness. "The transport cot. Now." Liam stared at her, paralyzed by fear. Maya didn't wait. She lunged towards the first incubator, her hands moving with a desperate, practiced speed. Disconnecting the leads from a 3-pound infant was a delicate procedure, a dance of color-coded wires and tiny adhesive pads. She did it in 5 seconds. The machine screamed a protest as she lifted the baby, a feather-light bundle of warmth, and carefully placed him in the large, multi-bassinet transport coat, a clunky piece of equipment used for internal evacuations, not for hiding. 1 down, 6 to go. The gunfire erupted again, this time punctuated by the unmistakable sound of shattering glass just down the hall. They were getting closer. With each baby she unhooked, a fresh wave of machine alarms joined the cacophony. The air was thick with the shrieking of unanswered alerts, a sound that grated on every one of her professional nerves. It was wrong. Every part of this was wrong. Moving them, unhooking Thamit, was a litany of broken rules, each one a potential catastrophe. A drop in oxygen, a missed apneic event, a sudden cardiac arrest, the risks were enormous. But the risk of a bullet tearing through glass and plastic was absolute. Liam, jolted into action by her fierce determination, began to help, his fumbling hands a stark contrast to her focused efficiency. Finally, the last baby was secured. 7 infants, nestled together in the transport cot. She shoved it towards the back of the ward, towards a small, windowless supply closet. It was meant for storing saline drips and boxes of gloves, not for saving lives. The cot barely fit inside. She squeezed it in, the plastic wheels catching on the doorframe. Safe? No, not yet. She looked at the door. It was cheap, hollow-core wood. It wouldn't stop a determined push, let alone a bullet. It was nothing more than a suggestion of a barrier. The shadow of feet appeared in the gap under the main ward door, moving fast. There was no thought, no decision. There was only a primal, overwhelming command that came from a place deeper than reason. Maya scrambled into the tiny closet, wedging herself between the flimsy door and the precious cargo in the cot. She curled her body into a shield, her back pressed hard against the wood, her arms wrapped around the front of the bassinet as if she could absorb any impact through sheer will. Liam crowded in beside her, his breath coming in ragged gasps. A gunshot exploded just outside the closet. The sound was deafening, the concussion rattling her teeth. Maya flinched violently, a choked sob escaping her lips, but she didn't move. She pressed herself harder against the door, trying to make her body denser, stronger. Tears streamed down her face, mixing with sweat as she whispered into the terrified silence of the closet. "It's okay," she breathed. The words meant for the babies, for herself, for the universe. "I'm here. You're safe. I've got you. I've got you." She closed her eyes and became a wall, a shield, waiting for the sound to stop or for the impact that would mean her best wasn't good enough. The sounds outside became a blur of shouts, heavy running, and then a final, decisive series of commands from a new set of voices, deeper, calmer, authoritative. SWAT. It was over. But for Maya, curled in the darkness, the battle had just begun. Maya Ramirez wasn't born a hero. She was forged in the quiet crucible of hard work and a deep-seated empathy that life had unexpectedly ignited. She carried the memory of her younger brother, Daniel, like a smooth stone in her pocket, a constant, tangible presence. He'd been born with a heart that was a beautiful, tragic puzzle, spending his first 3 months fighting for life within the sterile walls of a NICU just like this one. Maya, only 10 at the time, remembered the fear that gripped her parents, a thick, suffocating fog of bewildering medical jargon and sleepless nights. What she remembered most clearly, however, were the nurses. They were angels in blue scrubs, moving with a calm competence that seemed almost supernatural. They explained things in simple terms. They brought her mother lukewarm tea. They celebrated every tiny Victorian ounce of weight gained, a stable oxygen level as if it were a championship win. They were the ones who saw not just a failing organ, but a beloved son, a little brother. It was their compassion that had planted the seed. From that moment, Maya knew she wanted to be one of them. Her path wasn't easy. She was the first in her family to go to college, juggling 2 jobs to pay for nursing school, fueled by coffee and an unwavering determination to honor the memory of the nurses who had guided her family through the storm. She found her calling in the delicate world of the NICU, where she could be the calm in someone else's storm. What many of her colleagues didn't know, what was tucked away in the most private corner of her heart, was the quiet grief she carried. For 6 years, she and her ex-husband, Mark, had navigated the heartbreaking, cyclical journey of infertility. They had endured the invasive tests, the timed injections, the soaring hopes, followed by the crushing, blood-red certainty of failure each month. The dream of holding her own child, of feeling a life grow within her, had slowly eroded, leaving behind a hollow ache that never truly faded. The marriage hadn't survived the strain, buckling under the weight of unspoken sorrow. Perhaps, in some subconscious way, that unfulfilled maternal instinct found its outlet in the tiny, vulnerable lives entrusted to her care. Those weren't just patients. They were the fragile hopes of families, and Maya guarded those hopes as fiercely as she would have guarded her own. Her dedication wasn't just professional. It was deeply, profoundly personal. Every baby she saved was a small victory against the emptiness, a quiet affirmation of her purpose. The debriefing room was cold, the air scrubbed clean of the night's terror and replaced with the sterile chill of bureaucracy. Maya sat across a metal table from Detective Miller, a man in his late 40s whose weary, cynical eyes seemed to have already passed judgment. Her supervisor, Sarah Jenkins, the head nurse of the NICU, sat beside him, her posture rigid, her gaze darting nervously between Maya and the detective. Sarah, who had once been a mentor, now looked like a stranger. "Ms. Ramirez, let's go over your actions again, step by step," Detective Miller began, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "After the initial announcement of the active shooter, what did you do?" Maya's voice was hoarse, but she kept it steady. "I assessed the immediate threat. We were on the affected floor. The NICU has large glass windows. Staying put would have left the infants completely exposed to any gunfire in the hallway. Hospital protocol for an active shooter situation is clear. Shelter in place. Lockdown if possible. Remain in a secure location until law enforcement arrives." Miller recited, as if reading from a manual. "There was no secure location," Maya insisted, a spark of frustration flaring in her chest. "Not for those babies. The supply closet was the only room without a direct line of sight from the hallway, but the door, it wouldn't have stopped anything." Sarah Jenkins cleared her throat, her voice thin. "But the protocol, Maya? It's in place for a reason. For everyone's safety. To prevent chaotic responses. Protocol didn't account for 7 defenseless newborns in glass boxes," Maya shot back, her gaze fixed on the detective. "Protocol didn't factor in the sound of gunfire getting closer by the second. I made a judgment call. I moved them to the safest place I could find, and then I shielded them with my own body." Detective Miller leaned back, his expression unreadable. "You disconnected them from their monitoring equipment. You moved critically ill infants without physician's orders. Do you understand the potential ramifications of those actions? Any one of those babies could have deteriorated. Any one of them could have experienced a catastrophic event while unmonitored." His voice was calm, but the accusation was sharp as a scalpel. "That's a matter of luck, Miss Ramirez, not sound medical practice. We have to consider all angles here. Your actions, however well-intentioned, could have independently jeopardized the lives of those infants." The room fell silent. Luck. He had called it luck. The word hung in the air, a gross insult to the terror and the split-second decision that had consumed her. She hadn't been lucky. She had been decisive. She had acted. And now, in this cold, sterile room, her heroism was being reframed as recklessness. The next meeting was worse. It took place in the impossibly clean, cold administrative office of Mr. Thompson, the hospital administrator. His suit was perfectly tailored, his hair perfectly coiffed, and his eyes held the warmth of polished granite. Sarah Jenkins sat stiffly to the side, a silent, nervous accessory. "Miss Ramirez, we appreciate you meeting with us," Thompson began, his voice a smooth, corporate purr. "The events of last night were regrettable." "Regrettable?" Maya echoed, disbelief coloring her tone. "A man opened fire in a hospital. People were shot. I thought I was going to die. Those babies!" "Indeed," Thompson interrupted smoothly, holding up a manicured hand. "A terrible incident, and we are, of course, cooperating fully with the authorities. However, we also have a responsibility to this institution, to our patients, and, most importantly, to our stakeholders." He leaned forward, the friendly veneer dissolving to reveal the cold machinery beneath. "Ms. Ramirez, your actions, while perhaps well-intentioned in the moment, have exposed St. Jude's Metropolitan Hospital to a level of liability that is, frankly, staggering. You knowingly and deliberately violated established, board-approved active shooter protocol. You physically moved 7 critically ill infants without the express authorization of a supervising physician. There wasn't time," she argued, her voice rising. "Doctors weren't on the floor. I had to make a choice." "Nevertheless, the fact remains," Thompson said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush. "The parents of these children, they could have grounds for legal action. Our insurance premiums will undoubtedly skyrocket. The potential financial repercussions for this hospital are substantial. We aren't celebrating heroes today, Ms. Ramirez. We are managing a crisis that your deviation from protocol has frankly exacerbated." It was then that Maya understood. This wasn't about safety or protocol or even the babies. It was about money and lawsuits. Her act of selfless protection had been reduced to a line item on a risk assessment sheet. In the eyes of this man, she wasn't a caregiver. She was a problem to be managed. The final nail was hammered in a small, impersonal HR office. A stern-faced woman slid a thick packet of documents across the table. "Miss Ramirez, effective immediately, you are being placed on paid administrative leave pending a full internal investigation." "Paid leave?" Maya asked, stunned. But I need to be with my patients. The parents will be worried. This is standard procedure, the HR representative said, cutting her off. She tapped a paragraph on the top page. Please pay particular attention to Section 4.3 regarding communication. You are not to discuss the events of last night with the press, with any patients or their families, or with any other hospital personnel. Any violation of this directive will result in immediate termination. A gag order. They were silencing her, isolating her, cutting her off from her support system and the very people she had protected. It was framed as being for her own protection, but Maya knew a cage when she saw one. That night, her one friend and colleague, Chloe, called, her voice a hushed whisper. Maya, it's bad here. Thompson held a staff meeting. He talked about a breach of protocol in the NICU and how senior staff had to intervene to mitigate the damage. He's making it sound like you panicked and went rogue. Did anyone defend me? Maya asked, her voice small. A painful silence stretched over the line. People are scared, Maya, Chloe finally said, her voice full of apology. They're worried about their jobs. He's made it clear that anyone who doesn't toe the company line will be seen as part of the problem. The isolation was complete. The final blow came from the local news. She watched, numb, as a reporter interviewed a terrified young couple outside the hospital. We've been told there was an incident, a breach of protocol involving our baby, the father said, his voice choked with emotion. The hospital is being very tight-lipped. The hospital wasn't just silencing her, they were poisoning the well. They were feeding the parents a vague narrative of negligence, allowing their imaginations to fill in the terrifying blanks. The very people she had shielded were now being led to believe she was the one who had put their children in danger. Maya turned off the television and sat in the suffocating silence of her apartment, a hero cast as a villain in a story she was forbidden to tell. In a private room on a quieter floor of St. Rume, Jude's Alex the Wall Petrov sat beside a hospital crib, his 6'4", 230-pound frame hunched over in a posture of paternal awe and terror. As the captain of the St. Louis Sentinels, he was a man defined by strength and unflinching defense. But here, gazing at his twin sons, born 2 months premature, he felt as fragile as they looked. He and his wife, Anna, had been at the hospital during the shooting, trapped in their room, listening to the horrifying Code Silver announcement, powerless. They had been given the same sanitized corporate line from the hospital administration. There was an incident, but everything is under control. The NICU staff performed admirably, but Alex was a man who read people for a living on the ice. A subtle shift in a player's eyes could telegraph a play. He saw it here, too. The nurses were tense, their smiles strained, their eyes darted away whenever he asked for specifics. Something was wrong. Needing a strong cup of coffee to cut through his anxiety, Alex went down to the hospital cafeteria. As he waited in line, he overheard a hushed conversation between 2 nurses. One of them was Liam, the young nurse from the NICU, his face pale and distressed. They're crucifying her, Sarah, Liam was saying, his voice cracking. It's not fair. She saved them all. I saw it. She put her own body between those babies and the gunfire. Alex's blood ran cold. NICU, gunfire, babies. He stepped closer, his imposing presence causing the nurses to fall silent. He softened his expression, letting the worried father eclipse the sports icon. Excuse me, he said, his voice low and gentle. I couldn't help but overhear. You mentioned the NICU, and someone saving the babies? My sons, Noah and Ben, they're in there. Can you please tell me what happened? Seeing the raw fear in the captain's eyes, Liam broke. The words came tumbling out, the terror, the glass walls, Maya's impossible calm, the split-second decision to move the babies, and the final, selfless act of shielding the cot with her own body. Alex listened, his initial concern morphing into a white-hot fury. The hospital's vague reassurances were lies, a cowardly cover-up of an act of incredible heroism. He got Maya's number from a sympathetic older nurse who slipped it to him on a napkin with a whispered, "She deserves to know someone knows the truth." He called from the sterile quiet of his car in the hospital parking lot, the carefully constructed calm of the building now feeling like a facade. Hello? Her voice was hesitant, wary. Ms. Ramirez? My name is Alex Petrov. My sons, Noah and Ben, are in the St. Jude's NICU. A long silence. How? How did you get my number? That's not important right now, Alex said, his voice firm but kind. What is important is that I know what you did. I know you saved their lives. I just spoke with one of the nurses who was there. He told me everything. He heard her breath hitch, a small, wounded sound. "They put you on leave, didn't they?" he asked, already knowing the answer. "They're blaming you." "Yes," she whispered, the single word carrying the weight of all her fear and injustice. "They said I violated protocol. They said I endangered the babies." "That's bullshit," Alex said, the word a quiet explosion of anger. "You did what you had to do. You were a hero, and they're treating you like a criminal. Look, Ms. Ramirez, Maya, I can't even begin to thank you for what you did for my sons, my family. Because of you, they're still here, and I will not let them do this to you. You are not alone anymore. Do you understand me?" For a long moment, the only sound was the soft static of the phone line. Then, a choked sob, a release of the tension she had been holding for days. It was the sound of a lifeline being grasped in a storm. Hope, fragile but real, had finally broken through the darkness. The email was a marvel of corporate passive aggression. It arrived on a Tuesday morning, its subject line, "Regarding your employment status and internal review," so sterile it was chilling. The body of the message informed Maya that her final disciplinary hearing was scheduled for Friday at 9:00 a.m. It didn't say she was fired, but the implication was as clear as the glass wall of the NICU. This was her execution. The next 2 days passed in a blur of anxiety. The flicker of hope from Alex's call had dwindled, battered by the grim reality of the hospital's institutional power. What could one man, even a famous one, do against a multi-million-dollar corporation and its team of lawyers? She felt defeated, resigned to the loss of the career that had been her life's calling. Friday morning arrived, gray and drizzling, mirroring her mood. She dressed in simple black slacks and a gray blouse, armor for a battle she expected to lose. As she drove to the hospital, she steeled herself for the walk of shame, for the cold, judgmental faces of Thompson and the HR board. Pulling into the visitor parking lot, she was surprised by the media presence. A half-dozen news vans were lined up along the curb, their satellite dishes pointing at the sky. Must be a follow-up on the shooting, she thought numbly, keeping her head down as she got out of the car. She just wanted to get it over with. She walked towards the main entrance, her gaze fixed on the pavement, each step heavy with dread. It was only when she was 20 yards from the sliding glass doors that she looked up and stopped. Lined up on both sides of the walkway, creating a silent, solemn corridor, stood a wall of men. They were all dressed in the official dark blue jackets of the St. Louis Sentinels. 23 of them, a full roster, standing shoulder to shoulder. They weren't protesting, they weren't chanting, they weren't holding signs, they were just standing guard. Their faces were impassive, their posture radiating a quiet, formidable strength. At the head of the line, closest to the door, stood Alex Petrov. He saw her, and his stern expression softened for a fraction of a second. He gave her a small, respectful nod, a gesture of profound acknowledgement, before his gaze returned to the space in front of him, a stoic guardian at his post. The scene unfolded in a surreal slow motion. The drizzle, the gray sky, the grim hospital facade, it was all a backdrop for this incredible, impossible tableau. The sound of the city seemed to fade away, replaced by the frantic beating of her own heart. Why? Why were they here? For her? As she hesitated at the edge of this human shield wall, Alex took a half-step forward. His voice was low, meant only for her, but it carried with the clarity of a church bell. "We're with you, Maya," he said. "Go on in. We'll be right here." Tears welled in Maya's eyes, hot and sudden. A wave of emotion, disbelief, overwhelming gratitude, and a sudden, fierce surge of strength washed over her. The weight on her shoulders, the one she had been carrying since the moment the first shot was fired, suddenly felt lighter. She took a breath, lifted her chin, and began to walk. The moment she stepped between the two lines of players, the media erupted. Camera shutters clicked like a swarm of angry insects. Reporters shouted questions, but the Sentinels remained impassive, an impenetrable wall of silence. Their focus was solely on the small woman walking the gauntlet they had created for her. They were her honor guard. From his fourth-floor office window, Mr. Thompson watched the scene unfold, his face ashen. He had controlled the narrative, isolated the threat, managed the liability. He had been winning. But he hadn't accounted for this. He hadn't accounted for a hockey team deciding to become the city's conscience. His carefully constructed reality was being dismantled on live television by a silent, powerful act of solidarity he could never have predicted, and was powerless to stop. Maya walked through that shield wall, not as a condemned woman, but as a protected one. And she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that the verdict of the hearing inside no longer mattered. The real verdict had just been delivered on the rain-slicked pavement outside. The image was electric. It was the lead story on every national news network within the hour, a wall of celebrated athletes standing as silent protectors for a lone unknown nurse. The hashtag #ShieldForMaya exploded across social media, a wildfire of righteous indignation and heartfelt support. Memes appeared. The Sentinels goalie, his pads replaced with incubators. Alex Petrov's face superimposed on a classical painting of a guardian angel. Alex gave one simple statement to the press that afternoon, his words cutting through the noise with devastating precision. She shielded the most vulnerable with her body. The least we could do is shield her with ours. The administration of St. Jude's should be ashamed of themselves. The public outcry was a tidal wave. The hospital's phone lines were flooded. Donors, horrified by the story, began publicly announcing they were pulling their funding. The carefully crafted PR statements from the hospital were drowned out by a chorus of outrage. Inside the sterile hospital boardroom, Mr. Thompson was sweating through his expensive suit. He stood before the emergency meeting of the board of directors, stammering about protocol and liability. "Liability?" boomed Eleanor Vance, the formidable chairwoman of the board, her voice dripping with ice. "Bill, our liability just increased tenfold the moment the captain of the St. Louis Sentinels called us out for persecuting a woman who is now being hailed as a national hero. Our reputation, which we have spent decades building, is in ashes. All because you couldn't tell the difference between a hero and a line item." The vote was unanimous. Thompson's employment was terminated, effective immediately. Maya was at home, watching the news in a daze, when her phone rang. It was Eleanor Vance. "Ms. Ramirez," the chairwoman said, her voice a mixture of authority and sincere apology. "On behalf of the entire board of St. Jude's, I want to personally and unequivocally apologize for the way you have been treated. What you did was an act of extraordinary courage. Your suspension is lifted. Your record will be cleared, and a commendation for heroism will be added to your file. We would be honored if you would consider returning to your post, with a promotion to nursing supervisor and a significant salary increase." A few days later, the St. Louis Police Department issued a formal press release. It commended Maya's quick thinking and bravery, officially stating that her actions undoubtedly saved the lives of 7 infants. Detective Miller, in a separate statement, offered a personal apology for the nature of his initial questioning and any undue stress it had caused. The system, creaking and groaning under the weight of public pressure, was finally correcting itself. Justice, swift and decisive, had arrived. 6 months later, Maya stood confidently at a podium, the flashbulbs no longer intimidating. Beside her stood Alex Petrov. "Today," Alex announced, his voice resonating with pride, "I am proud to announce the launch of the Maya's Shield Foundation. Inspired by Maya's courage and the injustice she faced, this foundation, funded by the Sentinels and our community partners, will provide legal and financial support for healthcare workers who face retaliation for making ethical, life-saving decisions that may deviate from rigid institutional protocols." Maya stepped forward. She had respectfully declined the promotion at St. Jude's. Her path lay elsewhere now. "What happened to me was wrong," she said, her voice clear and strong. But what was truly inspiring was the outpouring of support that showed how many people believe in doing the right thing. This foundation is about ensuring that no other caregiver has to choose between their patient and their job. I am honored to serve as its first executive director. A year after the shooting, on a warm, sunny afternoon, Maya sat on a park bench. Nearby, Alex and Anna watched as their twin sons, now rambunctious toddlers, chased a soccer ball across the grass. They were healthy, happy, and loud. One of them, Noah, stumbled and ran to Maya, burying his face in her lap. She laughed, wrapping her arms around him, breathing in the sweet smell of sunshine and grass. This was the real victory. Not the headlines, not the foundation, not the vindication. It was this. The quiet, tangible proof of a life saved. The simple, profound weight of a healthy child in her arms. "We can never thank you enough, Maya," Anna said softly, sitting beside her. Maya smiled, her gaze on the children. "You don't have to. Seeing them like this is all the thanks I'll ever need." She was no longer just a nurse. She was a guardian, a shield, a woman who had walked through fire and discovered a strength she never knew she possessed. And in the quiet peace of the park, surrounded by the laughter of the children she had saved, she was finally home.